Even if Palestinians are the most pragmatic, docile people in the world, Israel would still insist, as they always have, on their self-declared right to steal their land because it's a Jewish supremacist state.
They're going to continue pursuing land theft while everyone is giving Netanyahu and Trump plaudits for their peace deal. There is no peace as long as we continue supporting the terroristic welfare state of Israel.
I am a Riva, and I was taught how to pray Salah.
That means every single time I pray,
the person who told me gets the reward.
5 times a day, from Fajr to Isha.
If you want to support someone like me in learning Salah,
then sponsor 10 people for just £100.
Remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, said,
charity does not decrease wealth. Click the button and donate now.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. I just watched Ana Kasparian and Aaron Mate masterfully debunk the lies of an entire pro-Israel panel on Piers Morgan. Let's first take a look at Ana brilliantly picking apart Israeli propaganda.
Very cautious optimism, especially given some of the statements that we've heard from the Israelis over the weekend. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech to the Americans that made it appear as though he believed in the ceasefire and was going to follow through with it. Remember, they've only agreed to the first stage of the ceasefire, and the rest of it is still incredibly murky. But then on Israeli television, he spoke in Hebrew and talked about how the military operation isn't over yet. Then you have Israel Katz talking about how as soon as we secure the release of all the hostages, we're going to go back in and destroy the tunnels. So there are some signs that make me a little uneasy, but I will say this. I was happy to see the hostages released. The videos of them reunited with their family members are incredibly moving. The innocent Palestinians you're referring to, though, are going home to raised communities, raised neighborhoods. They have no home to go back to. So I'm concerned about them and their well-being. That being said, it does appear that there's some humanitarian aid being allowed into the Gaza Strip. It remains to be seen if it's enough in order to help people who have been intentionally starved for months.
Do you give Donald Trump full credit for making this happen?
Well, no, I don't, because this is the same ceasefire that could have been agreed upon over a year ago, and it wasn't. So the real question is, what changed? Why did Donald Trump, basically put his foot down finally after tens of thousands of innocent people were killed, after, obviously there was the ground invasion in Gaza City, which has also been leveled. It's laughable to hear him talk about deserving a Nobel Peace Prize as he's ramping up a war with Venezuela under false pretenses. So, look, I'm not going to give Trump credit because, again, he could have done this a year ago, or at the beginning of his administration, I should say, and he refused to do it. By the way, the same for Biden. It's the same ceasefire agreement that Biden rejected that we're now learning, thanks to reporting from Israel, by the way. They leveled Gaza. They literally have 10,000 people missing in Gaza right now as we speak, presumed dead, trapped under the rubble. Over the weekend, they recovered over 200 bodies. You want to talk about the IDF protecting innocent human life? Why don't we talk about the Hannibal Directive and how many Israelis the IDF shot and killed on October 7th? This is something that Yoav Gallant, the former military minister for Israel, foreign defense minister, came out and said that did happen. We would rather not allow Hamas to take these hostages and use them as leverage. By the way, that's the same Yoav Gallant who, after October 7th, said that the Israelis should not negotiate for the release of the hostages and instead engage in a military operation in Gaza, which is what they did. They've leveled the Gaza Strip. There's nothing for these Palestinian people to go home to. And you want to talk about how the Palestinians and Hamas have rejected offers for a two-state solution after the clean break memo, after Netanyahu made abundantly clear that he would not allow for the formation of a Palestinian state, after the fact that every effort at creating a two-state solution was undermined by the Israelis. They don't want a two-state solution. The Likud's founding charter pursues the greater Israel project. They want that land. They're going to pursue that land. They're going to steal that land. And look, I am hoping that there will be lasting peace. But I'm also smart enough to pay close attention to what's going on in Israeli media. And based on what's being said in Israeli media, it does not appear as though there's going to be a lasting ceasefire. And I'm worried about that. So, look, Shabbos can sit here and lie about how, it's all Hamas's fault and the wonderful, precious, innocent Israeli government has only done the right thing and only the right thing. But that's just not true. They have committed war crimes. The IDF has committed atrocities that I never thought I would ever see in my lifetime. I thought humans had evolved past that kind of disgusting war crime behavior. And so to talk about how, like, oh, everything is so great, and Israel, we're going to go ahead and launder their reputation after the atrocities that they committed, after the genocide they carried out. And by the way, the continued atrocities that are currently taking place in the West Bank, I'm not going to sit here and stand for that. It's disgusting.
Anna was correct to be sceptical about this latest so-called ceasefire deal, which has been breached by Israel every single day since it was announced, resulting in the death of around 70 Palestinians in the last 5 days. As she said, Netanyahu and his cronies are doing their usual doublespeak in both Western and Israeli media, basically saying they're going to keep attacking Gaza as they please. Like Anna said, the Palestinian hostages are going home to rubble and ruins, so the war criminals responsible should not be celebrated for momentarily stopping their war crimes. Only if and when they are held accountable should there be a celebration. Anna spoke about how she was glad that humanitarian aid is finally being allowed into Gaza. However, it has materialised that demonic Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has almost immediately significantly cut the amount of aid that is allowed into Gaza from other nations. As Anna said, Trump should not be applauded for this sketchy ceasefire deal because he provided the weapons and money for the genocide to occur in the first place, along with his predecessor Joe Biden. Like she said, the ceasefire agreement was on the table since Biden was president. It was also there when Trump first came into office, and both of them rejected it, waiting until Gaza was totally decimated to sign off on it. Anna was correct to describe the IDF as an extremist organisation that is responsible for killing Israelis on October 7, 2023, as well as tens of thousands of Palestinians in the 2 years that followed. Anna was spot on when she said the main obstacle to Palestinian statehood is Benjamin Netanyahu himself, as well as his ethno-supremacist Likud party, who are hell-bent on stealing all of Palestine by hook or by crook. Let's look at what Aaron Mate had to say.
In the case of Palestine, as we're discussing here, what I'm hearing from Mark and Shabbos is a complete lack of awareness. The Palestinians are living under a brutal military occupation. Either you recognize that or you don't. If you don't recognize that, you're going to have continued disaster for the entire region and continued misery foremost for the Palestinian people. If you recognize, as most of the world does, pretty much the entire world, with the exception of the US and Israel, the Palestinians have been living under one of the most brutal, longest military occupations in the world and have been denied their basic rights. If you don't recognize that, you're not going to solve the problem. And Trump's so-called peace plan does nothing to address that. When it comes to the issue of Palestine self-determination and Palestinian statehood, there's one line. It says, we recognize Palestinian self-determination and statehood as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. If you recognize something as an aspiration, but not as a right, you have no obligation to grant it. And the message from Israel, if you listen to Netanyahu, is that there will be no recognition. And he has the full backing of the US in that. And that's not just a Trump thing. This has been bipartisan US policy for decades to reject the one thing that could solve all this is grant Palestinians their minimal right to freedom. And so in that context, people want to make this about Hamas and how they have no right to be there. This isn't about Hamas. Even if Palestinians are the most pragmatic, docile people in the world, Israel would still insist, as they always have, on their self-declared right to steal their land because it's a Jewish supremacist state. Until that's resolved, you're going to have perpetual conflict. On the issue of whether there could have been a deal, after October 7th, Hamas offered Israel to release all the civilian captives in exchange for Israel not attacking Gaza. Israel had no interest in that because October 7th gave them the opportunity to take care of the Gaza problem, as Norman Finkelstein has talked about on your show before, destroying Gaza, expelling as many people as possible. That's why Israel abandoned its own captives. And that's why, and Anna was correct to say, there was a deal on the table well over a year ago. Israeli negotiator Gershon Baskin, it was years of contacts with Hamas. He's confirmed this. Hamas accepted the exact same deal that was just accepted now.
You could argue the brutal occupation has worked with both. You could say, yeah, the Israelis have had a brutal form of occupation over the Palestinians, but so has Hamas.
I see things differently, Piers. Hamas won the elections, you're correct. What happened immediately? Israel put Gaza under a complete siege to the point where Israel was counting the calories inside Gaza that it would let every Palestinian in Gaza consume without having a full-blown starvation crisis. The idea was basically to punish the Palestinian people for voting the wrong way, for electing Hamas. And why did they elect Hamas? Is because the alternative was the Palestinian Authority, which is corrupt and had become a collaborator with Israel in the farce of the so-called peace process, which was simply just an excuse for Israel to steal more Palestinian land. So in that context, Palestinians elected Hamas. Israel responded by putting Gaza under a complete siege where Gaza had absolutely no hope to rebuild. Israel was in control of everything that came in and out, even banning things like chocolate. Hamas tried to actually moderate its position. And people laugh at this, but you can look at the record. It's true. And someone like Gershon Baskin, who's an Israeli negotiator, can confirm all this. Hamas leaders started talking about accepting a long-term truce with Israel. Then they started even saying we'd accept a Palestinian state in a very historic compromise. We'll accept a Palestinian state in just 22% of our historic homeland, the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem. So Hamas was far more moderate on the two-state solution than any Israeli leader, because unlike Israeli leaders, Palestinians were saying, we'll accept a state within the internationally recognized borders of Israel, pre-June 1967. What did Netanyahu say? He said there'll never be a Palestinian state because Israel insists on keeping these major West Bank settlement blocks full of fanatical settlers from Brooklyn, where I am, who terrorize Palestinians and steal their land and water. So Hamas also tried nonviolent protest with the Great March of Return. That was a massive march of people who went to protest nonviolently, as all people around the world told Palestinians to do. What did Israel do? They gunned people down with US-made weapons, maiming people, killing journalists, killing nurses, killing disabled people, maiming people, and telling Palestinians, no matter what you do, we're going to control you and make your lives impossible. That's the context in which October 7th happened.
Aaron was correct when he said the Palestinians have been living under one of the most brutal and longest military occupations in history, and any Hasbara agents denying or justifying this are out of touch with reality. As he said, there will never be peace if this Israeli occupation continues. Aaron correctly stated that Trump's so-called peace plan does nothing to address this, or the fact that Palestinians are still denied basic human rights that the majority of people around the world take for granted. Aaron also brilliantly called out the empty sentiment of nations recognising Palestinian statehood, but doing nothing to make it a reality. Aaron agreed with Anna that Benjamin Netanyahu, backed by the US, is hell-bent on not letting Palestine as a nation regain their independence. As Aaron said, Palestinian statehood would solve everything, because the number one reason for this conflict is that a bunch of European settler extremists have colonised a country that was never theirs, and refused to let the enslaved indigenous Palestinian people have rights to their own homeland. Aaron, as a Jewish man, put this obsessive Israeli oppression down to Jewish supremacy. Aaron was also correct when he said that Israel could have had all their civilian hostages back the day after October 7th, but rejected this because Netanyahu orchestrated the whole thing, so he would have the perfect excuse to destroy and then occupy Gaza. Piers Morgan, the eternal fence-sitter, tried to downplay Israel's inhumane occupation of Palestine as usual, only to be corrected by Aaron on the reality of the matter. As in, Israel has had Gaza under siege indefinitely, using starvation tactics decades before October 7th, and rejecting each and every peaceful request made by the Palestinians to have basic and equal rights, with the Israelis reacting to every gesture of peace with fatal violence. Let's watch the next clip.
Then there's this other group who makes this fatuous argument about, well, this should have happened long ago, but President Trump didn't want to do it long ago. It's ridiculous. Having been involved in diplomatic negotiations when I was in government,
it's literally confirmed.
Sometimes it is simply that the moment is not there. All the pieces need to fall in place, whether 2 years ago, a year ago, Hamas was not ready, or Israel was not ready, and it's an easy argument because.
Are you saying that an Israeli negotiator who was part of the negotiations is just making it up? Or is that what you're saying? So the Israeli negotiator who was in on these negotiations, are you saying that he's making it up?
What I'm saying is, I'm not sure Hamas agreed with him, but the fact remains is it's an unprovable assertion, and one data
Hamas
point
accepted the
doesn't
ceasefire,
prove your argument.
even during the Biden administration.
Okay. I hope that makes you feel better.
No, but tell me, do you... I just want to know... it doesn't make me feel better, actually. I just want to know, do you think the Israeli, who Aaron Mate referenced earlier, who said that Hamas had accepted the ceasefire deal even under Biden... Thank you, Aaron. Under Biden, even Biden rejected it. The biggest obstacle to that ceasefire, which could have been achieved literally over a year and a half ago, okay, was Israel. They did not want to stop the war in Gaza. And in fact, they continue raiding terror on Palestinians in the West Bank. Like, do we live in a fantasy world? Like, what are we doing here? Can we at least acknowledge reality? And if you love Trump, you love Trump. Go ahead and love Trump as much as you want. I don't really care. But I want the facts to remain. I want the facts to be aired on this broadcast instead of pretending as though Trump has been like this great peacemaker. By the way, as Israel continues fighting a seven-front war, as Trump himself, with his administration, plans for ground operations in Venezuela as we speak. Like, what are we doing here?
Anna, you don't have the diplomatic record to stand behind your assertions. I'll leave it at that.
Do you have a diplomatic record? What's your diplomatic record?
This isn't
What's
about
your diplomatic record? Tell me.
Among other things, I negotiated the end of piracy operations that were off the coast of Somalia, which saved hundreds of innocent people from being kidnapped. Some of the country we're still bombing.
We've been bombing for like decades.
Okay.
Can I say something, Piers? Listen,
all right.
None of our records have any bearing on the none of our records as individuals have any bearing on the actual record of Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy. And as myself and Anna have been pointing out, you can listen to people like Gershon Baskin, an Israeli negotiator, who pointed out that more than a year ago, Hamas accepted the exact same terms that were just accepted now. That's just a fact, no matter our own individual background. And you also had, and I said this earlier, according to the families of Israeli hostages, a spokesperson for the family said this very early on. Within a few days, Hamas offered to release all the civilian captives that they took on October 7th if Israel did not attack Gaza. But Israel's higher priority was not its own people, it's not peace, it was Jewish supremacy.
But to go back and suggest that within days or weeks of October the 7th, what Israel should have done to an enemy wedded to its destruction, who has repeatedly, since the attacks, and we're going to keep doing this, would not have attacked with great force, everyone would have done that.
Here's my problem with your argument is that you're presuming two things I think are false. One is that Israel is a normal country like other states, and two, that there's parity here. Israel is not a country living in peace with its neighbors, and the Palestinians just disrupted all that on October 7th. Israel was waging on October 6th one of the most brutal and longest running military occupations in the world, which it refused to end, which it had multiple opportunities to do. And contrary to the revisionism we've heard in this interview from people like Shabbos, that the Palestinians were offered this great peace deal and they turned it down. No, Israel's never risen to the level of offering Palestinians the absolute minimum, which is a contiguous state in the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, which, by the way, as I pointed out, Hamas has accepted. Hamas previously
Arafat was offered it. Arafat was offered an unbelievably good deal. Historically, people will say that was the moment. Bill Clinton, I've interviewed Bill Clinton several times about this, and he's absolutely clear, as are the Israelis, that deal was on the table and Arafat walked away.
Piers, listen, we can go into that record. There's a great new book by Robert Malley I have here. He worked for Bill Clinton. He was his negotiator. And he points out that what Bill Clinton said is just not true. Palestinians were never offered that. That's why Shlomo Ben-Ami, who was Ehud Barak's foreign minister, who you spoke to earlier, who was at Camp David when that so-called generous offer was made, Shlomo Ben-Ami said, if I were Palestinian, I would have rejected Camp David as well. Because contrary to all the spin, including from people like Bill Clinton, Palestinians were never offered a contiguous state in the West Bank and Gaza. They were offered a Bantustan state where they could live in little cantons surrounded by major Israeli settlement blocks that make Palestinian life impossible. And even Hamas, if you look at their charter, they revised their charter. I wish they'd been even more forthcoming than they were, but the fact is they were more accommodating on the issue of the two-state solution than any Israeli across the spectrum. And by the way, on the issue of Netanyahu, Ehud Barak said earlier that Israel's not Netanyahu. Okay, it's a nice message, but look at the polls. Most Israelis support ethnic cleansing in Gaza.
The stuttering Israeli propagandist dinosaur just couldn't seem to handle the pressure when Anna called him out for shamelessly lying about this recycled ceasefire deal. As Anna said, this same ceasefire deal could have been accepted a year and a half ago, but it was Israel that refused to accept it because they wanted to complete the process of genocide in Gaza before they signed off on it. And Anna was right on the money once again when she said despite this so-called ceasefire deal in Gaza now being in place, Israel is currently still raining terror on Palestinians in the West Bank, as well as being involved in a seven-front war of their own making across the Middle East. I find it hilarious when these Zionist mouthpieces get desperate after their propaganda gets debunked and they start talking about government credentials. Anna again pulled this idiot's card by pointing out that no one cares about the credentials handed down to you by the very same corrupt US government that is responsible for bombing Muslim countries in the first place that you're now doing cleanup jobs in. Aaron backed up all of Anna's claims about how this recycled ceasefire deal could have been accepted long ago with facts from Israeli sources. I mean, it doesn't get much more clear-cut than that. Piers Morgan, as always, tries to paint this as an equal two-sided conflict. What else can we expect from a guy that hails war criminals like Winston Churchill, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump as heroes? As Aaron said, Israel is not a normal or peaceful nation. They are brutal, illegal occupiers that have stolen Palestine to form their own fake country with the backing of the British and American governments. Let's watch the last clip.
The majority of Israelis, if you look at polls, are fine with actually Netanyahu destroying Gaza. There was polls showing that most people are not bothered by the reports of famine. Most Israelis support ethnic cleansing. And that's why we have a problem here, is because this is a fanatical society that embraces Jewish supremacy. And so Shabbos saying before he's proud to be Jewish right now, I'm upset to be Jewish right now. I'm upset that in my name, a genocide was perpetrated. An entire people have been under occupation for decades with no end in sight to their suffering. And here in the US, you have people being censored, constantly canceled because supporters of Israel claim to feel unsafe by merely people protesting genocide. And you also have in Israel, and this is the most important thing, Benny Gantz, the former defense minister, who's now in Netanyahu's opposition, he recently wrote that there's a national consensus inside Israel that there will be no Palestinian state. That's the real Israel that we're dealing with. And until that is rectified, and that is the actual extremism that has to be addressed. It's a repudiation of the ultra extremists, but that doesn't make it not extreme, because Are Palestinians offered any path to self-determination in this plan? No. All it says is we recognize this as your aspiration, which is like telling a starving person, I recognize that you're hungry and you aspire to have some food. We're not going to actually offer you any. And that's what this plan is. That sounds extreme to me. It sounds extreme to put people under one of the most brutal military occupations in the world and longest running and say, you have no path to your own freedom. In terms of what Israel should have done on October 7th, again, we're not talking about a normal situation of neighbors living side by side and one person attacks another. You're talking about an occupied people, desperate, under siege forever. They've tried nonviolent protest. They've tried to accept the two-state solution. Nothing works. October 7th was an act of desperation. It was a disaster for the Palestinians especially because it gave Israel the opportunity to do what it's always wanted to do, which is destroy Gaza and push out as many Palestinians as possible. In terms of what Israel should have done, Israel didn't have the right to fire a single bullet into Gaza. It had the obligation to end the occupation and the siege and then negotiate a peace that recognizes Palestinians.
Yeah, but that's where we disagree, because what you're ignoring there is that it was literally in Hamas's original founding charter.
Which they changed.
Okay.
In the charter of Netanyahu's party, Likud, which is from 1977. It's also in their charter that from the river to the sea, there will only be Jewish sovereignty. Okay. Has anybody asked Netanyahu to change his party's charter? The difference is his party has power. They're one of the most sophisticated and powerful armies in the world, backed by the world's top hegemon. Palestinians living under occupation, besiegement, have no power at all in this equation.
Netanyahu facilitating the funding of Hamas. Are you at all concerned about what's currently going down in Gaza with the militias that Netanyahu confessed to also facilitating the funding of? Who
I'm concerned by all of it, because
look,
just to be clear, I think Netanyahu was operating a deliberate divide and rule strategy between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and he thought he could manage that.
That's right.
And
he propped up Hamas intentionally.
I think he wanted to have Gaza and the West Bank separated politically by two groups and try and foment a distrust and hatred between the two groups. And that was his plan all along.
Ehud Olmert in 2007, 2008, who was no friend of Bibi Netanyahu, who does not like the Likud party, he offered 97% of the West Bank to the Palestinian people, and they literally said no. And you can shake your head and say I'm wrong, but if they said yes, then why isn't there a Palestinian state today? And when you, Aaron, when you talk about how Israel is not a normal country that is not living side by side with its neighbors, Israel signed a peace deal with Egypt in 1979. They have not been at war with Egypt since. Mind you, Egypt also bombed Rafah and Gaza in the early 2000s, nice. But I digress.
I just want to say, you know, even with all of the various individuals that Shabbos listed off, whether it's Yahya Sinwar or anyone else, they're all dead. Yet you still have Israel talking about Hamas and what a threat Hamas poses. And it's because they still exist. Of the fact that Israel carried out these military operations in Gaza, destroyed the Gaza Strip, which, what do you think that does? That multiplies Hamas militants. That radicalizes people. Because let me tell you something. If every single member of my family were killed by a government, if my neighborhood was raised by a foreign military, that would radicalize me too. It's common sense. But you know what? I almost feel like that's the whole game that Israel is playing as we speak. Because at the end of the day, it's an expansionist project. They want to steal the land. And I guarantee you, this isn't over. They're going to continue pursuing land theft, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. That's currently happening right now as we speak, while everyone is giving, you know, Netanyahu and Trump plaudits for their peace deal. There is no peace as long as we continue supporting the terroristic welfare state of Israel.
Aaron made reference to reports that indicate that the majority of Israeli citizens support Netanyahu committing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, as well as the starvation of Palestinians. Aaron made the claim that Israeli society is broken and fanatical and thrives off Jewish supremacy, which is a major factor as to why their culture is so toxic. Aaron also claimed that Israelis in general are extremists, especially when you consider how the majority of Israelis are forced to serve in the IDF and kill innocent people, which they do with pride and gusto. I respect Aaron for rejecting genocide and illegal occupation as being synonymous with his Jewish identity. If the majority of Israelis thought like Aaron, the world would be a much safer place. Aaron is of the opinion that Israel's response to October 7th should have been an end to illegal occupation of Palestine, as well as the official recognition of Palestinian statehood, and that Israel had no right to respond with force due to them being the long-term violent aggressors in this equation. I'm not surprised that a hypocrite like Piers Morgan would be opposed to this, and that he would talk about a previous Hamas charter which was revised long ago, as Aaron said, whilst at the same time ignoring the Israeli regime's current problematic genocidal charter. Anna this time around backed up Aaron by questioning Piers about Netanyahu's role in funding and propping up Hamas, just like Netanyahu is currently doing with Israeli-backed gang lines in Gaza, despite there being a supposed ceasefire in place, which resulted in Piers conceding that Netanyahu is guilty as charged. Ana also effortlessly snuffed out the other geeky Israeli propagandists when he chimed in with make-believe nonsense about how Israel played fair with the Palestinians, when she listed off real-life documented examples of prolonged and extreme violence carried out by the Israelis against Palestinians, all in the name of land expansion, whilst pretending they are peacemakers. And as she said, there will never be peace until Israel is held to account for their evil actions. All in all, this was a fantastic 10 out of 10 presentation of the facts by Ana Kasparian and Aaron Mate. Hats off to the both of them. They have my utmost respect for siding with truth against billions of dollars worth of censorship, cancellation and propaganda. Thank you for watching. Until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu Akbar, Allah.